Hi, English 10-1 students. It's Miss Picard, and I hope you are having a wonderful weekend and that you're getting ready for our final phase of Romeo and Juliet, where you're going to do some critical analytical writing. I'm really excited, and I'm going to do a couple of videos to help guide you through the essay writing process. Now, I know many of you have done this before, but I want to make sure that you have a toolkit and some little mini lessons to improve your writing right out of the get-go, so you're leveling up how you approach a text right from the start. I think you'll see over the course of these videos that my focus is really going to be on helping you think about essay writing as a bunch of stages in a process rather than just a product at the end. I find myself and with lots of my students that sometimes we get really nervous when we write a big project. Sometimes it feels like you can get writer's block. And for me, the way I get through that is by having a bunch of little steps and a bunch of options too for how I can get started, how I can make my work better, and how I can check things over to see if what I intended to put on the page actually came through. So if you've ever felt like the diagram there with essay tears flowing freely, don't panic. This is going to be actually a really fun process to work through having a really strong voice and getting out your opinion as a writer. So think about essay as a process, and you'll feel a lot better about what's to come. So generally speaking, over the course of these videos, I'm going to walk you through a couple of steps, 5 in total, as you draft your paper. It's going to be over several weeks, so we'll have check-ins along the way, and I'll be giving you some feedback as you're writing so that the comments can be applied in what you actually create. The first step is getting started. And so today in this video, you'll hear a little bit about planning strategies and what I do when I visualize my paper. You'll also start to develop some ideas, both in an introduction. And in your introduction, we're going to talk about the inverted triangle, the triangle way of seeing introductions, and also developing body paragraph ideas. So body paragraphs and intros, how do you get them to develop a single argument? In later lessons, we'll look at bridging the gaps between your paragraphs, so how you can transition carefully across, how transitional phrases play a good part in any writer's vocabulary and toolkit. And then finally, we'll talk about revising and leveling up. What are some different things you can do as you're writing to retool how your ideas fit together? That's revising, right? And how can you level up your engagement with your reader so that your essay sounds like you? It doesn't sound like, oh, boring. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in the story. No, you don't want to just retell. You want to have an argument. You want to be persuasive. And so we're going to talk about leveling up that impact, that argumentation or rhetoric, and what you can do when you're searching for feedback from others, okay? Now, so today, the first 2 categories are what we're focused on. So to get started, I've kind of put 3 starter steps out for you here. The first recommendation I can give you is before you do anything and get too far into writing or free writing, make sure you double check and use the prompt itself. So you'll usually in an essay have a topic that you're responding to. You have to make an argument to answer a question. It's not just retelling the story or proving that you've read something. It's actually answering that focused topic. So generate some synonyms. Find words that mean the same thing as those topic words. Make connections and do either a web or a point form list or a quick 5-minute free write to really understand what that topic prompt means. That's the first step. The second step is to match those generated ideas with some text details so that you know, like, okay, I wrote this free write, but it doesn't really fit Romeo and Juliet. So I have to maybe get rid of these ideas, but follow this one. You know how to take away and cull and cross out stuff that you're not going to use if you match some of those ideas to some text details. Because ultimately, you're going to answer that question based on literature, based on text. You have to have enough details from that text that support your argument. You can't follow every argument. You have to have ones that are supported by the characters, or arguments that are kind of like we call it correlated in math, right? They are on a parallel trajectory or track. So you might have a truth about a topic, about the nature of courage in a person's life, and maybe Romeo and Juliet shows what you need to be courageous and what courageous people have as a part of them. But maybe you also have examples of the opposite, of people who lack courage. And so you can use the play to argue both sides of that, but both have to do with courage. So you want to match your ideas and make sure that you're really on topic, and that the ideas that you know and details you've memorized or the details you're bringing into your paper, they really connect with the character journey, either because they parallel it or because the correlation is opposite. And actually, it shows that there's a relationship that's connected but opposite. Okay, we're going to try this out in a minute. The last thing I would say is to make sure that you have a controlling focus idea before you get into starting to write your paper proper. Your thesis should talk about a trend that happens with people. It's supposed to be general in scope, but not general in its wording. And I think this is a place where some students trip up sometimes. I think teachers in the past might have told you, oh, just kind of keep your intros general, right? Don't say everything in your intros. That's beginner advice. But you're now doing high school English, and what I would say to you is the challenge is not to be wishy-washy or fuzzy. That's not what general means in our case here. And a general introduction is something that talks about an issue that's beyond just Romeo, or beyond just one character, that's general for some section of people. It doesn't have to be every person, but it should be general for more than one person, or for a small group or a community, or a minority, or a small subset of characters. And so general just means general in scope. It means use the people language of like often in life, or some people experience this thing, but it does not mean you're wishy-washy about what you believe. So don't kind of keep mysterious in the background. You can create some anticipation, but you shouldn't be wishy-washy about your opinion, because that's what your teachers, that's what we want to see, is what you actually think, and a strong connection to the topic. Okay, so you're going to plan out your thesis. You can always revise it, but it's important to have that focus anchor before you get too far into your writing. And you may decide to also write your topic sentences as part of this first planning, just to keep on track, to make sure that you don't suddenly write a paragraph that's way off of your focus, because your job is to convince me of your idea. It means you have to keep going back to your idea. So these are the two topics for my class of writing the card essay. So we're going to talk about what the play suggests to you about how a person should respond to a chaotic environment. So what should a person do when the world around them seems to be falling apart? Now, this is a question that really applies well to the last half of the play. And so if you're interested in that, if you're interested in like the halfway mark to the end, then this is the question for you. So you can talk about, the feud between families and how that causes problems for Romeo and Juliet. Or you could talk about, spoiler alert, how Romeo's best friend Mercutio, in the duel with Tybalt, kind of spurs Romeo to get involved in a violent action that Romeo really didn't have any intention of doing. You can also see what happens when Romeo and Juliet are separated, and the chaos that happens with their decision making, and the fallout of their tragic kind of decisions. That can all be talked about with that option 1 question. So it's a good, there's more things too, but that's a really good one if you're interested in that second part of the play, or the kinds of advice like these violent delights have violent ends. What happens when we're in a place of chaos or acting out of that? Option number 2 is what is about independence. So if you liked the interactions between Romeo and Juliet and their parents, if you're interested in like these young people as young people setting a path for their life, a direction that, the Duke ultimately says, listen, they had the right idea trying to make peace here, how the youth were right, but the feuds the adults set in motion caused this tragic end. If you're interested in that issue of independence, then the impact that independence has in a person's life, what happens when you take a stand? What happens when you have to be different than your family, different than your history, different than your past ideas? Then option number 2 might be the topic for you, but you're only going to choose one of these topics. So make sure that you decide and kind of stick with it early in your process which option you're going to go with. Okay, once you choose that topic on page 18 and 19 of the course pack, then I'm going to encourage you to plan out that thesis idea, that focus idea. I'm actually going to have a separate video tutorial on that. And so if you want to pause the video at this point, there's going to be a separate video just on page 18 if you're interested in doing a planner that's a beginning, middle, and end arrow diagram. Again, it's totally an optional thing to use that arrow diagram. It's one way that I like to picture my thesis statements. I picture them as chemical equations. But if you don't like that, chemistry is not your thing, don't even worry with that video. It's okay. Instead, you can start to look at what an introduction contains. And there's a little activity on page 20 that I'm going to ask you to complete to sort out a practice introduction. Okay? So at this point, you're going to be pausing this video and either going into extra help for thesis writing, or you're gonna be like, no, I'm good with my thesis. You're gonna be going into the video, continuing in this video, after you do a little bit of planning on page 20, just making sure you know the parts of an introduction. I know this is not brand new for many of you, but I wanted to, at this point in the video, give you just a really brief reminder about what I mean by hook, bridge, and thesis in an introduction structure. This is the kind of typical triangle diagram. If you want to blast ahead, now's the time to go to page 20 and do that activity. Okay, still with me? If you're sticking around, here's my quick version of what an introduction, this little visualized top triangle of a paper, what that contains. You gotta make a connection with your reader, right? So if I'm gonna read your paper, you have to have sort of the handshake moment. Now that's pre-social distancing. You have to have the hello, the greeting, the kind connection with your reader. We call this a hook in writing. So it's from like a fishing metaphor, like a hook on the end of a line that kind of grabs, or a stage metaphor with a hook that pulls people. That idea of hooking into, getting a grasp on, is what the image is there with that word. And so it's an attention grabbing strategy that engages the reader, and typically effective hooks will begin with something that's a common connection, whether that's an image or a story, an anecdote, or a question that forces us into conversation. It'll begin with something that grabs and introduces and creates a connection with the reader. Now, I would say avoid purposeless questions, or paraphrasing the dictionary here. It's a very common strategy to be like, the definition of courage is. But let's face it, how many of us kick back on our Friday nights reading the dictionary? Right? Or when you meet somebody new at a party, or you meet somebody new in your class, is the first thing you do say, oh, well, let me show you my favorite word in the dictionary. The best word that describes me is. No, you don't do that, right? You shake hands, you have a natural sounding introduction to somebody. So you want to make sure your hook does its functional job, but you also want to make sure that it actually creates a relationship. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss out on. And that's the difference between satisfactory, like, okay, you did the handshake, you had to, connection, as opposed to an introduction that's beyond satisfactory, that's proficient or excellent, that really forges a voice for the author and a connection to the reader. Okay? Now that's the hook. You want to have it be a natural inlet for your reader to get into the flow of your argument. Now the bridge is doing a job like a physical bridge does, joining two land masses. The bridge connects that handshake, that general introduction, to the text that you're going to use to talk about your argument. So it's that material in between that transfers from that quote that you use to introduce your paper and shows why the quote matters for Romeo and Juliet. Or it talks about why that question really matters for characters in the play. It's that in-between section. Now here you might have a little bit of summary information about Romeo and Juliet, but it's not supposed to be just telling the story again. Any material in your bridge, it's like the little planet diagram there with the Saturn rings. Every little moment there in your bridge should be connected to your topic prompt. So if you're doing summary, it should be a summary about courage in the play. Not just about who and what and when in the play, but specifically about courage and about your hook material. Okay? And so that bridge materials, that middle sentences, it helps to introduce us into the text story so we know why you chose Romeo and Juliet or those characters that you're going to study. The very last part, typically, of an introduction is the thesis and roadmap section. Now, this is the most important. So you can see the triangle narrowed down to that pinpoint focus. That's because you want to say what the important takeaway is for people here. And this is where that general language comes into play. You're going to say that often, here's what courage does in a person's life, if that's the topic, right? And you're going to maybe point me ahead to the parts of the story in Romeo and Juliet that you're going to visit to prove your point. That's the roadmap. That's like the little directions on your phone that you follow. It's the stepwise, oh, I'm going to visit these 3 stops. But the thesis is the most important part, the controlling idea about people and about your topic words. Okay, that's a really quick introduction to what that little top diagram means. Now, if you've never seen one of these, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. If you've never seen one of these triangles before, it's basically a visualization strategy for organizing. And so in the later lesson, I'll talk a little bit more about that transition across paragraphs, that when we talk about the introduction as this triangle that has a focus narrowly focused at the bottom of your introduction, when that paragraph is that focused, you want to return to that little black kind of point, your target, in your introductory sentences at the start of your other paragraphs, because you want to keep reminding your reader of how your argument links together, like the links of a chain. It's in the conclusion where you might have a bit more freedom to put that pinpoint argument into focus about bigger trends, or to broaden your perspective again about people, or about your personal story, or about a metaphor that you introduced. Okay, so I'm going to go back and we're just going to look at a sample introduction. Now, at this point, if you haven't done page 20 yet and you haven't sorted out the pieces of an introduction, I'm going to invite you to pause the video and go in and sort which goes first, second, third, and fourth, because the next thing I'm going to do is to reveal the way those link together. Okay, so page 20 of your introduction practice booklet. Go there now. All right, still with me? If you're still with me, then we're looking at how you've sorted out the pieces of an introduction. The final introduction should look something like this. And so you can see in my sample intro, I'm still sticking with my example topic. Well, this is not your topic for our paper, but it's an example topic. Okay, so my example topic, what's the role of courage in a person's life? Here's how the sentences fit together. The hook. Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. Okay, that's the hook. Ooh, that's an interesting thing. There's like a nice little sort of reversal there in the middle of the quote, and that's a fancy rhetorical device I can talk to you about another time. This quote, here's the bridge part. So that hook part, ooh, I'm just in that cool reversal. Now they've got me hooked into this idea that loving someone deeply gives you courage. Okay. This quote speaks to how the forces of love and courage intersect in a person's life, an idea that's central to William Shakespeare's play, Romeo and Juliet. Nice. Both love and courage are essential in the lives of Shakespeare's star-crossed lovers, but there are different aspects to how courage influences each character's choices. I'm going to pause there for a second. That was all bridge material. You'll notice there was a very tiny quote, so you might have been told in the past, don't use quotes in your introduction. It's not illegal. We just recommend that you don't do too many of them. So what's there? It's like a compound word and a word. There's 2 words. So there's not a lot of quotes. So, but it is possible. It's possible to use it well. And that star-crossed lovers quote from the story, it's a tiny little one, right? It's setting me up to connect courage, love, and then some of the environmental things about faith that are problematic. Let's read how the bridge continues. The Montague and Capulet parents lack the courage to love and forgive each other, so their children are kept apart. Oh, so courage connects people. So if you lack courage, people are split apart. Okay. So the Montagues and Capulets lack courage, so the children are kept apart by an ancient grudge with devastating results. For Romeo and Juliet, on the other hand, love motivates them to courageously defy their families. Okay, so they have courage, so they're able to defy their families. That's another part of the role. Okay, so Romeo and Juliet have courage, so they can defy their families and free themselves from acting out of some habits that are just expected. Unfortunately, courage also causes people like Romeo and Juliet to act too quickly. Oh, okay, so the role of courage is that it can help you, but there's a problem with it too. This is starting to get thoughtful and complicated, right? So unfortunately, courage also causes people like Romeo to act too quickly and to make decisions all alone. Ooh, doesn't sound good, does it? So this writer has done a really good job. They've actually talked about 3 things about courage: that a lack of courage is a problem, that the presence of courage can make you free to act like independent, but that courage can also make you want to act too quickly, and that can be problematic. So there's 3 different roles of courage. So I would actually, all that blue stuff is kind of roadmap. It's both bridge, talking about the story, but it's also pointing ahead to where this person's going to argue their paper. It's really good. So those 3 blue bits are kind of the roadmap of what I'd expect the 3 body paragraphs to be, right? One's going to be about how the parents lack courage and why that's bad. One's going to be about Romeo and Juliet, how they have courage and that's good for them and their independence. And then the last paragraph is probably going to be about Romeo taking it too far and acting too quickly. All right. So here's what the yellow is the thesis. It's at the very end of the introduction. Overall, the play suggests that courage is necessary to break out of patterns. Now, I could have put for a person to break out of patterns to be really universal in my language, but this works okay. The play suggests that courage is necessary to break out of patterns, but blind and hasty courage can also cause devastating problems if people act all alone. So what's the role of courage? It's necessary to act independently in a new way, but it's a real dangerous thing, because if you act alone and independently, that can cause some problems. You can get isolated in bad ways. So that's what's happening in my lovely little introduction. I hope that makes clear the different parts. I hope that you've enjoyed seeing that introduction that was split apart, put together. And now the next bit is up to you. It's time for you to choose your topic. So you want to look at our 2 topics, either what the play suggests about responding to a chaotic environment, or what the play suggests to you about the role of independence in a person's life. Those are the 2 options. Only choose one. And then do about 10 to 15 minutes of planning. Could be free writing. It could be webbing. It could be getting synonyms for that topic word, like chaos. What is chaos? Disordered. Chaos is troubles. Chaos is unpredictable. You need to brainstorm some things connected to that, right? Chaotic environments, chaotic decisions, chaotic. So you need to think about that. Similarly with independence, you could brainstorm synonyms. Independence, so that means on my own, mature. Like, is that isolated? Is that bad? Is independence sort of a coming of age thing, a rite of passage? Is it ever undermined? Those are things you can start to think through. After you've done that, if you have time this week, I'd suggest you write as much as you're comfortable doing in our 3 hours of work together. But I'm not going to do the full lesson on body paragraphs. You just wrote me one I'm going to be giving you feedback on. So I'm going to cap the video off there, I think. But in this, looking ahead, we're going to talk a little bit more about the organizational strategies here and how to move from, maybe being worried about organization or just kind of staying in the realm of your brain and thinking it, to actually being organized, kind of ninja-like, you can see, or I guess samurai sword, being organized enough to really see it as a pointed decision that you're visualizing, like an athlete visualizes their game. So by thinking through the way your sections link together, I'm going to encourage you more and more to look at organization as a stepping stone to a much more sophisticated argument. And so you can see my little fencer image there is supposed to communicate that you're trying to pinpoint all the time your rhetorical punches, that you make a point that's going to convince me of your logic, like that I'm on board and you've won me over and you've guided me through every step of the way. And I can see that, like a precision painter or like a precision fencer, you have placed every movement, every part of your picture there deliberately. Okay, I'm excited to read what you come up with. We're going to talk about developing body paragraph details a little bit more next time, but you're pretty familiar at this point with setting up your focus with your point, proving it with zooming in with evidence, and then having discussion, pausing to talk about your proofs. That point proof discussion, or PPD, We've talked about that lots this year so far. So that's your job in your body paragraphs. If you're working ahead, make sure that you double check that you have this balance before you move on. And next lesson, we'll talk a little bit about bridging the gaps between your paragraphs. Okay, happy writing, everybody. I hope you have had, as I said, a great weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you in our meets. Take care. Bye.